at number 10 is Ted Kaczynski. Ted Unabomber Kaczynski was an anarchist and a mathematical prodigy. He excelled academically from an early age and has an insanely high IQ of 167. He made it into Harvard University at just 16 years old and ultimately gained a PhD in mathematics from the University of Michigan. Now, not too much later, he had become an assistant professor at the University of California, Berkeley, but after handing in his resignation, things started to go downhill. The Unabomber became a hermit and moved to a remote cabin in Lincoln, Montana. Between 1978 and 1995, he took the lives of 3 people and injured 23 others with homemade explosive devices. His manifesto was published in the Washington Post after being sent to the press anonymously, and it explained that the devices were extreme but necessary to attract attention to the erosion of human freedom necessitated by modern technologies requiring large-scale organization. I didn't write that, in case you were curious. That wasn't me. Anyways, he was caught when his brother read the letters in the news, recognized Ted's handwriting, and tipped off the FBI. The Unabomber was finally caught and sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. Number 9. Andrew Cunanan. Andrew Cunanan was incredibly intelligent as well, with an IQ of 147, but Cunanan was also a tactical liar. He would claim that his father was an Israeli millionaire, and he displayed early signs of antisocial personality disorder. To fund the lavish lifestyle that he craved, Cunanan would make friends of wealthy older men, which worked out for him when he moved in with millionaire Norman Blatchford, who treated him to luxury cars and vacations in southern France. But that didn't last, as Blatchford finally had enough of Cunanan and he was thrown out. Now, this hit to his ego led to the passing of at least 5 different people, including Chicago tycoon Lee Miglin and Gianni Versace, on July 15, 1997. In June of 1997, Cunanan became the 449th fugitive to be listed on the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list. It wasn't too much longer after the passing of Versace that Andrew's body was discovered in a Miami Beach houseboat, having taken his own life. Number 8. Thomas James Holden. Thomas James Holden was the first man to ever make the most wanted list of the FBI, so he kind of had to make this list. His criminal career began in the 1920s with the robbery of a mail train and didn't stop there at all. In 1930, he escaped from Leavenworth Penitentiary and was recaptured on a golf course in Kansas City. He was on parole in 1949 and drinking with his wife and her 2 brothers when an argument broke out, resulting in Holden taking the life of all 3, then fleeing with the FBI on his trail. He evaded them for quite some time, but the FBI caught him 13 months later after receiving a tip from a man in Oregon. Just a reminder, if you guys are enjoying what you're seeing, make sure to give us a like. It's all we really need to feel your support. Thanks, guys. Number 7. James Earl Ray. While Holden was the first man to make the list, James Earl Ray was the first man to make the most wanted list twice. His first crime is his most famous, as he was first wanted by the FBI for taking the life of Martin Luther King Jr. in 1968. He was captured 2 months later when a customs official at Heathrow Airport recognized his alias from a Canadian wanted list, but in 1977 he escaped from a Tennessee penitentiary, leading him to be put back on that list. But not for too long, as 3 days later he was recaptured and a year was added to his sentence, bringing it up to a grand total of 100 years, which kinda seems a little pointless, but I get it. Number 6. Victor Manuel Garena. While not the most evil, especially compared to most of the others on this list, Victor Manuel Garena has the longest membership on the FBI's most wanted list. In 1984, Garena was a Wells Fargo security guard who turned on 2 fellow workers in their Wells Fargo armored car. He isn't the most evil because all he did to the 2 other co-workers is tie them up, but he then fled with $7 million taken from the truck and was literally never seen again. To this day, the FBI is still offering a $1 million reward for information leading to his arrest. It would be insane if he happened to actually be caught at this point. Number 5. Omar August Pinson. Omar August Pinson brings us back to the more evil side of things, as he was convicted of slaying an on-duty Oregon police officer before he made a jailbreak. Omar managed to evade capture on the run for almost a year, and even made it out of a shootout in January 1950 with Montana police completely unscathed. The problem for Pinson here came when a car salesman identified him and gave the FBI enough clues to track him down. He was recaptured in September 1950 and returned to prison, making parole in the early 70s. Number 4. William Bradford Bishop Jr. William Bradford Bishop Jr. made the list for pretty brutally taking the life of his wife, mother, and he disappeared in 1976. In the next few years, witnesses claim to have seen him in several different locations overseas, but he still hasn't been caught. Bishop wasn't added to the FBI's most wanted list until 2014 when the Bureau had produced an age-advanced image of him to aid in his capture, but it failed to turn up any leads, and 2 years later he was dropped from the list again. He would now be 84 years old if he is still alive, but we just might not ever know, which is kinda not a great feeling. Number 3. Robert William Fisher. Robert Fisher is actually on the current FBI most wanted list for taking the life of his wife and their 2 children before blowing up the house that they all lived in Scottsdale, Arizona in April 2001. He was described as a cruel and distant control freak towards his family. He and his wife would fight a lot, and Fisher was embarrassed that his son Bobby did not like to hunt or fish, and once tried to teach him and his daughter how to swim by throwing them off of a boat. Fisher was also very controlling about the house they lived in, not allowing the walls in the house to be painted anything other than white, and only a small number of pictures were allowed on the wall. Any sentimental objects of his wife's had to be kept hidden away. He's still out there, so watch out. Number 2. Eduardo Ravello. Guess what? I have another guy who is included on the current FBI's most wanted list, just to keep you a little on your toes, you know? Eduardo Ravello was indicted in Texas in 2008 for his alleged involvement in racketeering activities, conspiracy to launder monetary instruments, aka money, and conspiracy to possess substances with the intent to distribute them. His criminal activities began in 2003, and Ravello is known to be a captain within the Barrio Azteca American-Mexican criminal enterprise, and is allegedly responsible for issuing orders to the Barrio Azteca members, who allegedly act as hitmen for an even bigger substance trafficking organization. Apparently, in total, they are responsible for a whole number of lost lives. Ravello himself has ties to Mexico and El Paso, Texas, and it's presumed that he may have had plastic surgery and altered his fingerprints, but he's still out and about at the moment. And in at number 1 is Ted Bundy. I bet you were wondering if more recognizable names would show up on this list. Well, you were right. The vicious serial killer Ted Bundy was actually a 2-time member of the FBI's most wanted list, who committed his first known killing in 1974. Following his first, Bundy unfortunately took 12 more lives during his time until one of his victims escaped, but even then, before he could actually be arrested in 1975, he did it again 5 more times. During his 1977 trial, he escaped from the courthouse through a window and was most wanted for 6 days before recapture, but like I said, he was on that list twice, as later that year he escaped again. He committed 3 more attacks and took 2 more lives before finally being stopped for driving a stolen car. Thankfully, this monster can never escape again, as he was put to the electric chair in 1989.
Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have Christopher Scarver. It makes total sense to start this list off with Christopher today, and you'll soon see why. On June 1st, 1990, Christopher showed up at the Wisconsin Conservation Corps Training Program office, and there he demanded money from the man he found. When the man only gave him $15, Christopher went on to shoot him. Christopher then went and demanded money from another man and continued to shoot the man he had already shot until this second man gave him money. Christopher was caught and convicted for this atrocious crime, but his story does not end here. On November 28th, 1994, Christopher was assigned work detail with 2 other inmates. One was Jesse Anderson, who had taken the life of his own wife, and the other was none other than Jeffrey Dahmer. Well, when the 3 were left alone, Christopher took a bar from a piece of equipment in the exercise room, and that was used to basically beat and kill the other 2. I'm not gonna lie, there's no excuse and no reason for any of the crimes that any of these people committed, including these ones, but there is a very weird sort of poetic justice to that. Christopher was tried again for these 2 crimes and received 2 more life sentences. In our number 9 spot today, we have Richard Ramirez. Richard, who is also known as the Night Stalker, was a serial killer who terrorized the streets of Los Angeles in the 1980s. He was known for his MO of invading homes, which left him initially being dubbed as the walk-in killer, but he had another signature that was concerning to many people at the time. Richard was known for leaving behind different satanic messages at the scene of his crimes. Because of his satanic signature, after he left his first pentagram at the scene of a crime, authorities became worried that he was a Charles Manson copycat, but instead instead he was just his very own kind of monster. It is said that he would leave more pentagrams behind while also telling his victims to swear to Satan instead of God. During his court appearances, he would hold up a pentagram, and after pleading not guilty, he said, "Hail Satan." In our number 8 spot today we have David Parker Ray. Often referred to as the Toy Box Killer, this guy is anything but fun. This serial killer's nickname comes from how he soundproofed a semi-trailer in which he called his toy box, and he equipped it full of everything a nightmare human would need to commit his horrific crimes. Here's the thing, although he was highly suspected of taking lives, there was never enough evidence to prove it because the bodies were never found. This means that although many people are quite sure that he did such things, he has never officially been tried for it. He was, however, tried and convicted for kidnapping as well as for harming those that he had taken. He would sometimes include his wife in these instances, she was a willing participant, and then many of those he took he would later drop off on the side of a road somewhere after using barbiturates in an attempt to destroy their memories that could potentially identify him. Whether he took any lives or not, I suppose is still up for debate, but that does not mean he is in any way better than anyone else on this list. He is equally as horrible of a person. In the end, David was convicted for his crimes, which is thought to be up in the range of about 60 instances, and in 2002 he died of a heart attack in prison. In our number 7 spot today we have the River City Ripper. One of the most terrifying things that exists are serial killers who are still on the loose, especially when you find out that they've been pretty recently active. This serial killer is wanted in connection to 4 different incidents that occurred in Little Rock, Arkansas, 3 of which were fatal. These horrific crimes took place between August of 2020 and April of 2021, and despite one of the victims thankfully surviving the attack and being able to provide a description of the assailant, there is still very little to go on in terms of being able to identify who this person is. The FBI was contacted shortly after the survivor was able to give a testimony to authorities, and their behavioral analysis team created a profile of this unidentified killer. These crimes are terrible any way you spin them, but one of the most terrifying part that they were just random acts of violence that occurred completely unprovoked. The case has gained quite a bit of attention, but still, the monster remains at large. In our number 6 spot today we have Arthur Shawcross. This man is also known as the Genesee River Killer, and his crime spree began in 1972. In trying to navigate these online guidelines, I can't exactly say who he specifically targeted, but what I will say is that while everyone on this list is particularly horrible, Arthur's were some of the worst kind of crimes, if you catch my drift. This story, however, is a little unlike some of the others today because after his first 2 crimes, he was apprehended, but for some insane reason they allowed him to have a plea bargain where he was allowed to plead guilty to just 1 charge of only manslaughter, for which he served 14 years of his 25-year sentence. In the least surprising turn of events, once he was released on early probation, his real crime spree got started. He would go on to take the lives of 12 women from 1988 to 1989. Thankfully, he was finally caught for these crimes and sent right back to prison. Of course, his initial early release was the subject of huge controversy, rightfully so, and Dr. Michael H. Stone, professor of psychiatry at Columbia University, called his early release, quote, one of the most egregious examples of the unwarranted release of a prisoner. In the end, Arthur passed away in prison while serving a 250-year sentence. He passed in 2008 after suffering a heart attack. In our number 5 spot today, we have Robert Hansen. Robert is often referred to as the Butcher Baker, and his story truly is horrific. He's one of the most prolific serial killers in Alaska's history because for over a decade, he would kidnap women, bring them into the wilderness, and that is where he would then stalk them like prey. The reason he got away with his crimes for so long is because outside of these crimes, he was just a soft-spoken baker. Robert was heading to church by day and prowling the streets at night. What led to his downfall was a badass named Cindy Paulson who was able to escape from Robert and was sure to leave evidence behind. She then went to authorities and told them what happened, and this led to a search warrant for Robert's property, which is where all the evidence that they needed lied. Robert is believed to have taken the lives of at least 17 women, and in 1983 he was sentenced to 461 years and a life sentence without the possibility of parole. In our number 4 spot today we have William Bonin. This horrible person is responsible for taking the lives of 21 young men in Southern California from May of 1979 to June of 1980. It is said that on at least 12 of these occasions he was assisted by one of his 4 known accomplices, and it is even speculated that he might be responsible for 15 more of these crimes that evidence hasn't officially been been able to connect him to. He was often referred to as the freeway killer because of the fact that most of the bodies were found along the freeway of Southern California. The police surveilled William until they could catch him in the act, which they did. In the beginning, he claimed innocence, but after receiving an impassioned letter from one of the victim's mothers, which asked him to please share the location of her son's body, he confessed his guilt. But he made sure to clarify that it wasn't so that the mother could be at peace and her pain could be eased. No, of course not. Instead, he said, quote, "I was dying for a hamburger and I knew if I went out with the cop, they would get me a hamburger." At his first trial, the prosecutor described him as, quote, "the most arch-evil person who ever existed." William was convicted on 14 of his crimes and was sentenced to death. He spent 14 years on death row before his sentence was carried out in 1996. In our number 3 spot today, we have David Berkowitz. David Berkowitz, or the Son of Sam, is an American serial killer who terrorized New York from July of 1976 to July of 1977. He took the lives of 6 people and wounded 7 others, all while eluding the biggest manhunt in New York City history. He was one of those arrogant ones who leaves like little notes for the police promising to do it again. Well, his arrogant self was caught for his crimes, and he was arrested on August 10th, 1977 and was indicted for his crimes. He confessed to all of them and claimed that he was just obeying the orders of a demon that had manifested itself in the form of a dog that belonged to his neighbor. Okay, David. He was found mentally competent to stand trial and he pleaded guilty to his crimes, which left him being sentenced to 6 consecutive life sentences. He later admitted to making up the dog story, which like, duh, but he did say that instead he was a member of a violent satanic cult and his crimes were committed as a part of that. These claims were investigated, but no one has been able to confirm or deny them. In our number 2 spot today, we have Glenn Stewart Godwin. Man, this guy definitely has quite the story. So basically in 1980, Glenn was working in California and didn't really have too much of a criminal record. For some reason, he and his roommate, however, decided to make a plan to rob someone that they knew who was once a friend of theirs. Of course, things go awry and it turns into a botched robbery and Glenn ends up taking the life of the person they were robbing. Both Glenn and his roommate were tried and convicted for the crimes in 1983. This is not where the story ends though. In 1987, Glenn tried to escape prison and failed, and this landed him at a higher security prison, Folsom State Prison, which is maximum security. Somehow, once at this new prison, he attempted another escape, and this time he was successful. He fled to Mexico, where he tried unsuccessfully to be a part of the illegal drug trade. He was arrested again and sentenced in Mexico, and this is when American authorities began the process of getting him extradited. During that process, Glenn decided that it would be a brilliant idea to take the life of an inmate who was a member of the Mexican drug cartel, which very obviously slowed the process of extradition. This gave him time to plan another escape, which he did in 1991, and since then, he's been on the run. In our number 1 spot today, we have the Long Island serial killer. Also known as the Craigslist Ripper, the LISK is an unidentified suspect who is believed to have taken the lives of 10 to 16 people over the last 20 years. The victims so far that are known have been sex workers who used Craigslist to advertise their work. After the disappearance of Shannon Gilbert, police were searching an area along the Ocean Parkway, and that is when they began to discover the remains of the victims. The first 4 were found in December of 2010, with another 6 being found in March and April of 2011. As of December 2015, the FBI is now officially involved in the investigation. There has been a suspect in the case, but any formal charges have not been laid in terms of these crimes. The most recent evidence found in regards to these cases was a belt found at the scene of a crime, which may potentially belong to the killer. At the same time, it was announced that new scientific evidence was being used in the investigation, but these announcements came just last year, so we have yet to receive any further updates. Hopefully the case is solved quickly so that the families of the victims can receive justice and this terrible person is off the streets for good.
Coming in at number 10, the Eastbound Strangler. Back in 2006, one fateful night, this monster took the life of 4 women and was never seen from again. The Eastbound Strangler targeted 4 New Jersey escorts and left them behind the Golden Key Motel, face down, in a row, facing east and about 60 feet apart from each other. The victims were left fully clothed, minus having their socks and shoes removed, and all appeared to have been killed in the same way. Early on, there was speculation that it could have been linked to the Long Island killer, another unknown attacker, but it was later ruled out by investigators. Despite 15 years of investigation, they have never been able to come close to any leads, and whoever was responsible has never been caught, and the $25,000 reward remains unclaimed. Next up at number 9, the Texas Killing Field. Now, what would seem like a normal 25-acre patch of land just off the highway near Houston, Texas, is actually a haunted haunting field where more than 30 bodies have been found since the early 1970s. Nearly all of the victims found have been young women and girls, and there are apparently many more missing women from the area, but no remains beyond the 30 victims have ever been recovered. Despite the authorities' best effort, it is unknown how many perpetrators have actually contributed to this field, though it's suspected that more than one person is responsible. To date, only 3 of the cases have been successful in convicting an attacker, and the remaining 27 remain unsolved, with no leads and no luck of where to turn next. In 2011, a film entitled Texas Killing Fields was made about the series of crimes associated with the notorious plot of land, but it was not received well, and unfortunately did not kickstart anything more than upset families of the victims and a few false confessions to the atrocities. Coming in at number 8, the flat tire murderer. Active between 1975 to 1976, this monster is believed to have been responsible for between 12 to 35 deaths, though the exact number is still unknown. The perpetrator got his name as allegedly he would offer to help women traveling alone who had gotten a flat tire, but unbeknownst to them, it was the attacker who had deflated their tires in the first place. While not all victims followed this exact formula, it was certainly the method for the first of his 2 victims. Bodies of the victims were found dumped into canals, while their cars were found abandoned miles away. Authorities believe the cause of their deaths to have been from drowning, and were all found with signs of being taken advantage of prior to their death. Over the years, with no culprits being found for these vicious attacks, some have suggested it could have been the work of notorious Ted Bundy, but that's merely speculation and has no evidence to back it up. For all we know, the flat tire murderer remains on the loose. Coming in at number 7, the Honolulu Strangler. Credited with being responsible for the death of 5 women, this unidentified killer was active only between 1985 to 1986 and was never caught. The sadistic perpetrator was known to target women, but that seems to be where the links stop. All of his victims were brutally attacked and taken advantage of, and then left tied up on the street to be found by police. Authorities took this case very seriously, as at the time it was the first known repeat criminal of his kind in Honolulu. Local authorities put together a 27-person task force, but even with all that manpower, they were never able to find the attacker. There was hope when a man named Howard Gay was arrested, as he seemed to fit the profile, but he was eventually released after further interrogation. Years later, in 2017, the case was covered by a true crime podcast, and once again in 2022, but despite its popularity, we have no idea what happened to the Honolulu Strangler. Next up at number 6, the West Mesa Bone Collector. Back in 2009, a woman on a leisurely walk with her dog came across something peculiar, a human bone. Little did she know, she'd actually stumbled upon a major crime scene. Upon her discovery, authorities became immediately involved and discovered that it was a mass grave filled with human remains. Nicknamed the West Mesa Bone Collector, this killer was active between 2001 and 2005 and was a truly sick man. He was known to target young women, usually Hispanic, and almost always involved in late night services or with connections to the drug trade, but not exclusively, making it hard to identify just why he chose the victims he did. The thing is, during 2001 to 2005, there were reportedly more missing persons than usual, but I guess the New Mexico police didn't feel much need to dive into the disappearance of women involved in this type of work. While we know practically nothing about the killer, we do know that he is responsible for the deaths and that he would take the bodies to the desert to dispose of them. After years of police investigation, the remains of 11 women were found scattered in the deserts of Albuquerque, but the exact way they died is yet to be discovered, as medical examiners and forensic experts have not been able to identify his methods, which is very unusual. Police and FBI have never been able to track down who is responsible for ending these young women's lives, and the monster remains on the loose. Coming in at number 5, the Frankfurt Slasher. Between 1985 and 1990, this monster preyed upon women in a rough neighborhood in Philadelphia. The Frankfurt slasher was known for being incredibly violent, mutilating the victims' bodies past recognition. What was designed to be on the inside of the body, like organs and muscle tissue, would often end up exposed, and then after having his way with the victims, he would leave them on the street, strategically posed for when the police would find them. Believed to be responsible for the death of 9 women, the Frankfurt slasher targeted specifically white women, usually ladies of the night, with a public history of mental illness. But oddly, the ages of the victims ranged from 28 all the way to 68. One man, Leonard Christopher, was convicted of one of the crimes in 1990, but more happened once he was put away, causing concern that maybe they'd found the wrong man. Further, significant questions have popped up regarding the quality of evidence they used to convict Christopher. He apparently did not match witness reports of the white man seen with other victims, leaving many in fear that the Frankfurt slasher remains uncaught and unidentified. Next up at number 4, the Chicago Strangler. Between 2001 to 2018, a reported 75 Chicago women all lost their lives the same way, suffocation. But it wasn't until 2019 that a task force was made to try and stop these killings from happening. Originally, authorities denied that there was any link of the crimes and denied it all being one person committing them, hence the delay in gathering a task force. But after an article from the Chicago Tribune ran in 2018, they were forced to admit that it was in fact a distinct possibility. As was uncovered in the 2018 article, there was in fact a few distinct links between the crimes. All the victims were women, all the victims were killed the same way, and nearly all the victims were black. Coincidence or not, the optics were very bad, as it seemed the authorities were not taking the death of black women seriously, and the task force was created. Then in 2021, a docuseries on Discovery Plus began streaming, and though activists were demanding answers from the Chicago Police Department, they still maintained they could neither confirm nor deny if the killings were from a repeat convict. We still have no clue who killed these women, and they still remain out in the world walking free. Next up at number 3, the I-70 killer. You wouldn't think the shopping mall off the highway would be a dangerous place to be or get a job, but in the spring of 1992, it very well could have been. 30 years ago, along the Interstate 70, or I-70, an unidentified man was responsible for the death of 6 store clerks who all had the same thing in common. They all worked in a shop off the same highway, they were all brunettes with long hair, and they were mostly all women. Except for one man, but he too had long hair and wore a ponytail, and police suspected the killer mistook him for a woman from behind. The attacker oddly didn't seem too interested in anything but taking their lives, as he rarely robbed the stores after, and if he did, he would maybe take $100. After one of the attacks, a customer actually walked in the store and caught him, the 2 victims on the floor, and the attacker still with the weapon in his hand. But fearing for his life, he ran away as fast as he could, and in shock, didn't call the authorities until nearly an hour later, well after the man had escaped the scene. A few years later, in 1994 Texas, 2 similar attacks took place, and then again in 2001 Indiana. The cases have been featured on America's Most Wanted, Unsolved Mysteries, and Dark Minds, but the man has never been caught and remains walking among us to this day. Coming in at number 2, Hercules. While some say killer, others say vigilante. This perpetrator separates themselves from the rest. The distinction between Hercules and, say, the Frankfurt slasher? Well, Hercules only attacks those who have already committed a brutal crime. Or rather, one very specific brutal crime, taking advantage of women. In 2019, 3 men were found in Bangladesh, each shot and each with a note tied around their neck. While not identical, all the notes followed the same structure. First stating the name of the victim whose neck the note was wrapped around, followed by the name of the victim who they had attacked. It would then explain that this was the fate of those who committed this crime and that others should beware. Signed, Hercules. Law enforcement has yet to uncover who is responsible for these deaths, but have no clue if the killings are by one person or a group of people. It sure has sparked debate, with many questioning who the real bad guy is here. And last up today at number 1, Pedro Lopez. Nicknamed the Monster of Andes, Pedro Lopez might be one of the most notorious criminals alive. After being kicked out of his childhood home at just 8 years old for taking advantage of his younger sister, Lopez was evicted and sent to live the rest of his childhood on the streets of Colombia. According to Lopez, not long after he was thrown out, he was abducted and assaulted, and then by 13 was taken in by a family, but after 2 years ran away. By 1978, Lopez claims to have been responsible for the death of 100. That same year, an indigenous tribe caught him and was going to execute him, but a nearby missionary took pity on him and demanded they release him and call him into the authorities. The police, however, for whatever reason, promptly released him from custody. From there, he fled to Colombia once again, followed by Ecuador, where he reports to have attacked about 3 girls a week, and when he was caught and arrested in 1980, he confessed to killing 200 victims, but there's suspicion that it could have been worse, as many as 360. Though he did remain jailed for 14 years, in 1994 he was released from prison for good behavior and sent back to Colombia to serve the rest of his sentence in a psychiatric facility. But only 4 years later, in 1998, he was ruled legally sane and released on a $50 bail. Rather predictably, he fled the country after his release, and a warrant for his arrest was promptly released. His whereabouts remain a mystery, and no one knows if he has committed any more attacks since he vanished.
Starting off this countdown, we have Eugene Palmer. Eugene Palmer is said to be the oldest man to make it on the FBI Most Wanted list. On September 24th of 2012, Eugene Palmer shot and killed his daughter-in-law Tammy. Apparently, Eugene Palmer's son, John Palmer, was having a rough time with his relationship with Tammy. Eventually, they started seeing other people, and Tammy filed for a restraining order against John. This made Eugene very angry. Days before the murder, Eugene confronted Tammy and they had a huge argument. On the day of her murder, he shot her from a distance before fleeing in his truck, which was later found abandoned. Despite multiple searches, Palmer has never been found. The FBI is offering a reward of up to $100,000 to anyone who can provide helpful information leading to his arrest. And at number 9, we have Robert Fisher. Robert Fisher has been on the run since 2001. As of now, he would be 60 years old. It started on April 9th, 2001, when Fisher took the lives of his wife and 2 children before blowing up their house. He was charged with a triple homicide and arson, and he's been on the run ever since. On April 20th of that year, his car was found in a forest near Payson, Arizona, but Robert was nowhere to be found. To this day, he remains a very wanted fugitive. Fisher has notable surgical scars on his lower back and is said to chew tobacco regularly. There is currently a $100,000 reward for information leading directly to his arrest. However, it's said that he is in possession of a number of weapons, including a high-powered rifle, so he is armed and dangerous. It's believed he is in New Mexico or Florida, but the FBI doesn't know for sure. In our 8th spot today, we have Victor Manuel Jarina. Victor Manuel is one of the longest criminals on the FBI's Most Wanted list. Victor was a car guard working for the Wells Fargo Express Company. On September of 1983, Victor arrived at work before pointing a gun at his supervisors and handcuffing them. He then stole $7 million in cash before fleeing. This was the largest cash robbery in the US history at that time. He had planned this with 2 other men, but had turned on them and took the money for himself. On May 14th of 1984, he became a member of the FBI's top 10 most wanted fugitives. In 2010, he became the fugitive to have spent the most time on that list. To this day, there are no real leads as to where he may be, but it's thought that he's living in Cuba. The FBI is still offering a $1 million reward for information leading to his arrest. Moving on to number 7, we have William Bradford Bishop. William Bradford Bishop Jr. is a former United States Foreign Service officer who is now a wanted fugitive. On March 1st of 1976, Bishop started to spiral after not receiving the promotion that he really wanted. He then left his work early, drove to the bank, withdrew money, and then bought a sledgehammer, gas can, shovel, and pitchfork. He then returned home where he killed his wife, mother, and 3 sons. He then drove the body several miles away before burying them in a wooded swamp, and then he set that area on fire. There are currently no leads as to where he might be now. If he was alive, he would be 85 years old. Now, over the years, people have claimed to have seen him overseas, but there have been no solid leads. It's believed, though, that he's somewhere in Europe, which really narrows it down. In our sixth spot today, we have Arnaldo Jimenez. Arnaldo is wanted for the death of his wife, Estrella Carrara. On May 11th, 2012, the pair got married at Chicago City Hall, and they were as happy as they could ever be. That night, they had dinner with some family and friends before heading to a nightclub. However, on their way home, the couple got in a heated argument. It resulted in him fatally stabbing his new wife before dragging her body into their apartment. He then placed her in a bathtub and fled. After not picking her kids up from a family member's house, people began to worry, and she was reported missing to the police. It's thought that he fled to Mexico. A reward of up to $100,000 is available for information leading to his arrest. We are now at our fifth and halfway mark today with Hazel Leota. In August of 1999, Hazel Leota placed an ad in a Lonely Hearts column looking for love. That's when she met Charles Baker. Immediately, she was attracted to Charles because he was a widow who recently got a large sum of money from his insurance. So shortly after meeting, the two moved in together. In September of 1998, Charles was found dead in his house. His car and $45,000 of his money was missing, and so was Hazel. She had killed him and took off with his cash and car. Turns out Hazel wasn't who she said she was. No shocker. In fact, she had over 25 different aliases. She's also been married 10 times and is wanted in Lincoln, Nebraska. The last time anyone saw her was in December of 1998 when she was spotted in a truck stop near Wheat Ridge, Colorado. She hasn't been spotted since. If she's alive to this day, she would be in her 70s. In our fourth spot today, we have Alvin Scott. Alvin Scott is wanted in a double murder. In August of 2001, his wife left him and was living with a male friend in the meantime, and Alvin did not like this. On the day of their divorce proceedings, Alvin stalked the two and killed them both. Alvin has more than a decade's experience in military training and was an experienced PI, so he was able to stalk the two and shoot and kill them from his car. He then fled and has been on the run ever since. It's believed that he has multiple fake passports and multiple fake identities, and due to his experience in the military, he's been hard to track. He is one of the FBI's top 10 most wanted fugitives, and there's a $100,000 reward for any leads on his whereabouts. In our third spot today, we have Joe Matthew Constance. On June 5th, 2011, Joe Matthew Constance broke into his ex-wife's house looking for her. However, she was not there. There were, however, other people there, so he threatened them with a gun, being like, "Tell me where she is or I'll kill you." They did not reveal where his wife was. So Joe searched the whole house and eventually did find her on the property. He then shot and killed her before fleeing. He was charged with first-degree murder, aggravated assault, and aggravated burglary. However, he's still never been caught. There is a $20,000 reward out there for any information leading to the arrest and conviction of Joe. Moving on to number 2, we have Jason Derek Brown. On November 29, 2004 in Phoenix, Arizona, Jason Derek Brown shot and killed an armored car guard outside of a movie theater before fleeing with the money. Since 2004, he has been wanted for murder and armed robbery. Now, Jason portrayed himself as a wealthy man, but in reality, he was tens of thousands of dollars in debt. This was his motive for the murder and robbery. If he's still alive, he would be 52. FBI has made it clear that Jason is armed and very dangerous. There is a $200,000 reward for anyone who can provide information on Brown's whereabouts. And in our number 1 spot today, we have Badrush Kumar Patel. After getting married in India, Badrush Kumar and his wife Palak left their home country to start a new life in the United States. In fact, they both got jobs at Dunkin' Donuts and they worked together. On April 12th of 2015, while working a night shift, Palak was on the phone with her family, crying, saying that she wanted to go back to India. In fact, the pair's visas had expired. A while later, he led her to a back room in the store and stabbed her multiple times. This was after the two had an argument. She wanted to go home to India and he wanted to stay in the US. After taking his wife's life, he fled the scene. Now, customers at the store grew concerned after they realized that no one was in the store to serve them. A police officer just so happened to be nearby and decided to check out the scene. That's when he found Plak. Badrush Kumar has been on the run ever since. A $100,000 reward is available to anyone who can provide information leading to his arrest.
Starting off our list, in our number 10 spot, we have Vicki Dawn Jackson. Vicki was a woman who worked as a nurse for a number of years. She first got her nursing license in 1989, but it wasn't until the 2000s when things took a seriously dark turn. Between December of 2000 and February of 2001, the hospital that Vicki was working for recorded a number of deaths that was unusual. It was a higher amount. Most of these patients were in the age range of 60 to 100 years old, and of course people just chalked this up to the advanced age of most of these patients, but a rumor began to spread that someone just might be responsible. After this, the hospital's administrator noticed that a vial of a drug called Mivacron had gone missing. You might see where I'm going with this. As it turns out, the person responsible was Nurse Vicki, and she had at least 10 patients whose lives she took by giving them too much of this missing drug. It was a muscle relaxant. Take in that this is 10 people between December and February. That is an unbelievable amount of people in a remarkably short amount of time. You might be wondering why she took these lives, and apparently she did it when she found these people rude, or quote, too demanding. In our number 9 spot today, we have Daniel Perez. Also known as Lou Castro, Daniel led a cult that was located on a 20-acre property in a rural area just north of Wichita. He convinced his followers that he had magical powers, and he told them all that he was a centuries-old angel who needed to commit some horrific crimes in order to stay alive. These crimes would have certainly been more than enough to throw him on this list, but he of course couldn't just stop at committing one type of crime. He had to make sure he really stole the show on just being the worst. Basically, he had the really clever idea to use his followers' life insurance policies to live a lavish lifestyle, like as if no one would think that's weird or suspicious. While some of these life insurance policies were collected through regular means, of course that kind of greed only leads to evil things, which of course means that he ended up taking one of his followers' lives so that he could collect the cash. It is thought that he also contributed to the deaths of some of the other people's life insurance policies he cashed in on, but unfortunately there was never any evidence that would be able to substantiate that claim. Despite this, however, on April 21st, 2010, authorities were able to arrest Daniel, and he was charged with 28 felonies. In February of 2015, he was convicted on all counts and received a sentence of 80 years in jail, where he remains. In our number 8 spot today, we have Chester Turner. Chester is an American serial killer who, on April 30th, 2007, was convicted of taking the lives of 11 women in the Los Angeles area, and on June 19th, 2014, he was convicted of 4 more that they were able to tie back to him. He has been referred to by prosecutors as one of the most prolific serial killers in the city's history, and if you know Los Angeles' history, that says a lot. In his original trial that led to his conviction, Chester was sentenced to death, but at the following one in 2014, he also received an additional death sentence. In the end, like with a lot of these kinds of stories, DNA came to save the day and help authorities find out who was committing these horrible, horrible crimes. In our number 7 spot today, we have Michael Bear Carson and Susan Carson. This couple is not one that anyone would want to encounter. The stories of these two come from the 80s. They were married, and on the outside they appeared like just a couple of harmless hippies. We all know not to judge a book by its cover though. In the end, they would go on to become known as the San Francisco Witch Killers. Didn't know San Francisco had so many witches running around. Basically, together the pair took the lives of 3 separate people between 1981 and 1983. They started off by killing their roommate, who Susan claimed was a witch, and said that she was stealing her quote health, power, and beauty. They next killed one guy that they worked on a farm with because they said he was a demon, and the final person they took the life of unfortunately picked up the pair as they were hitchhiking, and they took his life because they claimed that he was a quote black witch, whatever that means. Essentially, they were just committing crimes against people that they claimed to be witches. The pair were each tried and convicted for each separate crime and are both serving sentences of 75 years to life, and of course neither of them have shown any kind of remorse for what they've done. In our number 6 spot today, we have Samuel Dietman. Samuel is just one half of the pair known as the serial shooters. He, along with a man named Dale, were actively committing these crimes between May of 2005 and August of 2006, and basically they were arsonists who would randomly set fire to objects, but they would also drive around and commit random acts of violence, taking people's lives. In the end, a series of tips is what led investigators to identify the perpetrators of these horrible crimes, in particular one from a friend of Samuel who explained that Sam had actually confessed to some of the killings one night while drinking. In Dale's trial, he was sentenced to death 6 times, and his brother, who was later found out to have assisted in some of the crimes, was sentenced to 25 years. Samuel was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Dale ended up taking his own life while on death row, which is why this point mainly focuses on Samuel, who remains in prison. In our number 5 spot today, we have Keith Hunter Jesperson, also known as the Happy Face Killer. After the body of his first victim was found, Keith had someone else actually claim to be responsible for his crime. You would think that this would have been his ideal scenario, but that was not the case. He wanted to be known for his crimes, so to help himself get media attention, he drew a smiley face on a bathroom wall hundreds of miles away from his crime scene, and here he left an anonymous letter where he confessed to the crime and provided proof. He didn't end up receiving a reply, so he decided to write more letters to the media and to the authorities, each signed with a smiley face. In the end, Keith was initially caught after he became the prime suspect in the death of his girlfriend at the time. Previously, his victims had been people that he had no connection to, so this was truly the mistake the authorities needed to catch him. Keith then admitted to his crimes, and while he has formally been linked to 8 deaths, he has confessed to somewhere around 185. Keith was tried and sentenced to life without parole for his heinous crimes, and he remains in prison at Oregon State Penitentiary. In our number 4 spot today, we have Quincy Allen. Quincy Allen is a man who went on a crime spree between July and August of 2002, where he took the lives of 4 people. His crime spree was actually inspired while he was in prison serving time for stealing a vehicle. It was here that a fellow inmate decided to start recruiting others and told him that he could get him a job as a mafia hitman, and this is all that Quincy needed to be inspired. As soon as he was out of prison, he began practicing for his new, upcoming career. Quincy started off his horrific crime spree on July 7th, 2002 by attacking a 51-year-old homeless man who was sleeping at the time. Luckily, this man was able to survive this attack. His crimes continued until he was arrested on August 14th, 2002. After his arrest and trial, Quincy received a sentence of death and is still on death row awaiting execution. His sentencing did not deter him from the criminal life, however, as in 2009, Quincy, along with another inmate, planned an attack on a correctional officer at the prison they both reside at. In the end, the guards had to use rubber bullets to subdue the pair. Quincy was intended to be executed on January 8th, 2010, but there was a stay of execution that was accepted, and as of July 26, 2022, Quincy's death sentence was overturned. In our number 3 spot today, we have David Berkowitz. David Berkowitz, or the Son of Sam, is an American serial killer who terrorized New York from July of 1976 to July of 1977. He took the lives of 6 people and wounded 7 others, all while eluding the biggest manhunt in New York City history. He was one of those really arrogant ones who leaves the little notes for police promising to do it again, kind of like taunting them. Well, his arrogant self was caught for his crimes, and he was arrested on August 10th, 1977, and he was indicted. He confessed to all of his crimes and claimed that he was just obeying the orders of a demon that had manifested itself in the form of a dog that belonged to his neighbor. Okay. Sure. He was found mentally competent to stand trial, and he pleaded guilty to his crimes, which left him sentenced to 6 consecutive life sentences. He later admitted to making up the dog story, which we know, but he did say that instead he was a member of a violent satanic cult and his crimes were committed as a part of that. These claims were investigated, but no one has ever been able to confirm or deny these claims. In our number 2 spot today, we have Sean Great. Sean is a serial killer who committed a series of crimes from 2006 until he was apprehended in 2016. Throughout his decade of criminal activity, it is thought that he took the lives of at least 5 people. In September 2016, Sean was arrested and later indicted for 2 killings, as well as kidnapping and harming a woman whose 911 call actually led to his arrest. At the same time, in another county next door, he was also being charged with 2 other deaths, as well as another one from all the way back in 2006. This final count from all of those years ago was actually an unsolved Jane Doe case who had been unidentified for 12 years. When Sean confessed to this crime, he wasn't even sure who she was, he just said that he believed her name was Dana. On May 7th, 2018, Sean was convicted on 2 of the counts, and on March 1st, 2019, he pleaded guilty to 2 of the others, and on September 11th, 2019, he pleaded guilty to an additional count. In the end, he was sentenced to death and has remained on death row since that final plea and sentencing, and he is currently scheduled to be executed in 2025. In a very bittersweet turn of events, in June of 2019, that Jane Doe victim was finally able to be identified through the DNA Doe Project, and she was identified as 23-year-old Dana Nicole Lowry from Minden, Louisiana. It definitely can't bring her back, but there is a lot of comfort in knowing that her family finally received some answers. In our number 1 spot today, we have Glenn Stewart Godwin. In 1980, Glenn was working in California and wasn't really living a life of crime, so it's pretty surprising that in this year, he and his roommate decided to make a plan to rob someone they knew who was once a friend of theirs. Of course, things go awry and it turns into a botched robbery, and Glenn ends up taking the life of the person they were robbing. They then tried to blow up the crime scene to get rid of any evidence, but of course that didn't work and also just made them look even more insane. Both Glenn and his roommate were both tried and convicted for the crimes in 1983. This is not where the story ends. In 1987, Glenn tried to escape prison and failed, and this landed him at a higher security prison. At this new prison, he attempted escape again, and this time, he was actually successful. He fled to Mexico, where he tried, unsuccessfully, to be a part of the illegal drug trade. He was arrested again and sentenced in Mexico, and this is when American authorities began the process of getting him extradited. During this process, Glenn decided that it would be a brilliant idea to take the life of an inmate who was a member of the Mexican cartel, which very obviously slowed the process of extradition. This gave him time to plan another escape, which he did in 1991. And since then, he's been on the run. Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have Israel Keyes. Israel is quite a prolific serial killer and truly is a terrifying person. While everyone on this list is horrible, Israel is particularly scary because of the fact that he had no MO or type. He just killed at random. In fact, he was so prepared for these random crimes that he left kill kits all over the United States so that he would be prepared for whenever whoever he chose crossed his path. It isn't quite clear how many of these crimes he committed, and many missing persons reports that are still open could potentially be linked to him. It is said that Israel had a sort of admiration and obsession with other prolific serial killers like Ted Bundy or Robert Hansen. He even said, quote, "I probably know every single serial killer that's ever been written about. It's kind of a hobby of mine." In March of 2012, Israel was finally apprehended and was to stand trial for his crimes, but unfortunately, while awaiting trial, he went on to take his own life. He left behind a note and a drawing of 11 skulls, which led authorities to believe that this may be the number of victims that he had. In our number 9 spot today, we have Richard Chase. This evil person is said to have taken the lives of 6 people within the span of a month between 1977 and 1978. That's a lot of people in a very short amount of time, which is so terrifying. Before his crimes, Richard's life was already full of terrible stories and horrific acts that had him spending time in mental health institutions before his crime spree started. While at these facilities, he was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, but after going through treatment and beginning medication, he was deemed to no longer be a threat to society, and he was released into his mother's care. Here's where things take a turn for the worse. Instead of helping take care of Richard, his mother instead weaned him off of his medication and got him all set up with his own apartment. Nice. Really helpful and very cool of her. Initially, when he moved into the apartment, he had roommates, but eventually they all moved out and he was alone, which is when things really got wild. He began killing various animals, which he would then eat raw, sometimes mixing the organs with Coca-Cola in a blender and then drinking it. After this, he would unfortunately go on his killing spree, which had horrific details and would only end when he was startled by a visitor at the home of where his final crime took place. He fled the crime scene but was later caught and stood trial. Although there were many attempts to have him be spared of the death sentence, in the end it didn't work. In December of 1980, Richard was found passed away in his jail cell after taking too many of his prescribed medication. In our number 8 spot today, we have Charles Ng. Charles' story really starts off shortly after he moved to the United States on a student visa. He dropped out after his first semester, and soon after he was involved in a hit-and-run accident. He then tried to avoid prosecution by enlisting in the United States Marine Corps using false documents that stated that his birthplace was within the United States. He was arrested by military police a year later for stealing automatic weapons, and then somehow he escaped custody, headed back toward Northern California, and this is where he met Leonard Lake, who is another real piece of work. Charles did end up going away and serving a bit of time, but it was only 18 months and he was back with Leonard, and that is when the two started their crime spree together. It is is believed that together the pair took the lives of somewhere from 11 to 25 different people. When Leonard was caught and brought in for questioning, he sneakily took a cyanide pill he had hidden in his jacket, and he took his own life, but Charles did end up standing trial. He was convicted for 11 of the killings, and he remains on death row at San Quentin. In our number 7 spot today, we have Rodney Alcala. Rodney is a horrible monster who was convicted and sentenced to death for 5 killings that he committed in California from 1977 to 1979. He also received an additional 25 years to life after pleading guilty to 2 other killings in New York in 1971 and 1977. Rodney got away with his crimes for a while because he wasn't the top of the lists of suspects, because he was said to be a quote charming photographer. Rodney is often referred to as the dating game killer because of his appearance on the show, with what we now know about him is absolutely horrifying. What's crazy is that he actually won the show he was on, but the episode's bachelorette refused to go on a date with him because she found him too creepy. This is just a reminder to always trust your instincts. It isn't exactly known just how many victims Rodney had. It is potentially thought that it could be much higher than the number that he was convicted for. In July of last year, Rodney passed away in prison at the age of 77. In our number 6 spot today, we have Scott Erskine. In early life, Scott began to commit very violent crimes against others that I really can't even talk about here on YouTube. When he was around 17 years old, he spent around 4 years in prison for one of his crimes, but then he was paroled after the 4 years and he immediately began committing crimes again. In 1993, Scott invited a woman who was waiting for the bus into his home and ended up holding her hostage for several days. After letting her go, he was quickly arrested and he ended up being sentenced to 70 years in prison. This is when he had to submit DNA to a database, and in March of 2001 that DNA was matched when the cold cases of the unsolved killings of Jonathan Sellers and Charlie Keever were reopened. In 2004, a jury sentenced him to death, and 6 days later he was transferred to San Quentin. In an interesting turn of events, Scott did die on death row, but it wasn't due to a scheduled execution. Scott died a couple of years ago in July of 2020 after contracting COVID-19. In our number 5 spot today, we have Tommy Lynn Sells. Tommy Lynn Sells was an American serial killer who was responsible for 22 confirmed deaths, but the authorities have said that they know that there are more. I actually watched an interview that he did, and one of the aspects that really creeped me out about him while watching him talk about his crimes is how you can tell that he committed these crimes because he wanted to. He just wanted to and he liked it. In the end, Tommy was caught because of someone who survived his attack in the most incredible way. She was able to go on and give such a good description of him that it led to his capture, and she was able to positively identify him. Not only did she save her own life, but who knows how many others in the end. Tommy and his crimes were deemed so horrific that he did end up receiving a death sentence. While in jail, he said that there wasn't one day that went by where he didn't think about, quote, the one that got away. Tommy's life came to an end when he was executed on April 3rd, 2014. In our number 4 spot today, we have Gary Ridgway. This horrible human being is also sometimes known as the Green River Killer, and his crimes took place somewhere between 1982 to potentially as recent as 2001. He was convicted for 49 crimes, but he confessed to an unbelievable 71, which makes him the second most prolific serial killer in the United States in terms of confirmed killings. Most of his victims were either sex workers or women in other vulnerable circumstances, and through DNA profiling evidence in 2001, authorities were able to connect him to 4 of his crimes. From there, they made a deal with him where they would spare him the death sentence in exchange for the disclosure of all of the locations of all of the missing women. Gary took the deal and was spared the death sentence, and instead was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. He remains in prison and is currently 73 years old. In our number 3 spot today, we have Chester Turner. Chester is an American serial killer who, on April 30th, 2007, was convicted of taking the lives of 11 women in the Los Angeles area, and on June 19th, 2014, he was convicted of 4 more that they were able to tie back to him. He has been referenced to by prosecutors as one of the most prolific serial killers in the city's history, and if you know Los Angeles' history with things like that, that is not something to take lightly. I mean, like 4 of these were Los Angeles. Due to other crimes that Chester had committed where he was caught, he had to submit a DNA sample. This sample is what ended up leading authorities to solving these other horrific crimes that he had committed. At the time, the cases were turning cold, but thankfully Chester being caught for the other crimes is what allowed them to have a break in the case. In the original trial that led to conviction, Chester was sentenced to death, but at the following one in 2014, he also received an additional death sentence. In our number 2 spot today, we have Albert Fish. Albert is one of the oldest people on this list, but that that does not mean his crimes were any less horrific than anyone else's. Dubbed the Brooklyn Vampire or the Moon Maniac or even the Boogeyman himself, it is clear that Albert was a terrible human who did awful things. In the early 1900s, Albert was arrested, tried, and convicted for killing and eating 3 people, but the horror was not over there. No, Albert began to claim that although people knew about 3, the number was closer to 100, and he even claimed that he had some in every state. It's disgusting. To make matters even worse, as if it already wasn't terrible enough, this deranged lunatic also sent a letter to the mother of one of his victims. He detailed everything about how he lured her and the rest of the horrific things that occurred afterwards, like how he proceeded to eat her over the course of 9 days. Yeah, this is just another person that I'm not sad at all that they just don't exist anymore. That's perfectly fine by me. In our number 1 spot today we have Quincy Allen. Quincy Allen is a man who went on a crime spree between July and August of 2002 where he took the lives of 4 people. His crime spree was actually inspired while he was in prison serving time for stealing a vehicle. It was here that a fellow inmate decided to start recruiting others and told him that he could get Quincy a job as a mafia hitman. When Quincy was released, he decided to buy a shotgun so he could start practicing. Man, I wish he showed this kind of dedication to literally anything else. Quincy started off his horrific crime spree on July 7th, 2002 by attacking a 51-year-old homeless man who was sleeping at the time. Luckily, this man was able to survive the attack. His crimes continued until he was arrested on August 14th, 2002. After his arrest and trial, Quincy received a sentence of death and is still on death row awaiting execution. His sentencing did not deter him from the criminal life, however, as in 2009, Quincy, along with another inmate, planned an attack on a correctional officer at the prison they both reside at. In the end, the guards had to use rubber bullets to subdue the pair. The correctional officer they attacked thankfully didn't succumb to his injuries, but he was forced to find another job as after the attack he was suffering from PTSD, and all the charges pertaining to this specific attack were later dropped by prosecutors who suggested that there was no point in trying someone who is already on death row. This did, however, get Quincy and the other inmates stripped of all of their privileges at the time, which included outside recreation, visitation, phone use, and canteen items. Quincy was intended to be executed on January 8th, 2010, but there was a stay of execution that was accepted, and as of July 26th, 2022, literally just like a few months ago, Quincy's death sentence was overturned.
Starting us off at number 10, Juha Veikko Valjakala. I'm sure I butchered that completely, but just bear with me here. This rampant killer has had quite the in and out experience with prison. His first release was in 1988 when he and his girlfriend Marita wasted no time getting back into trouble. One night Juha stole a bike from a random family and the father and son of the house witnessed the theft, so they decided to chase after him. The assailant led them to a cemetery where he took both of their lives but was caught by the victim's wife who had gone out looking for her husband and son. Making sure to cover his tracks, Juha struck the wife in the head with his rifle before stabbing her to finish the job. He and Marita fled the scene and were later found and arrested for the triple homicide. During the trial, the couple blamed each other for the gruesome events, but ultimately Juha was charged with the heftier life sentence and diagnosed with a psychopathic personality. While in prison, he continued to cause issues, trying to escape on multiple occasions, but still by 2001 was granted day parole. Often he wouldn't return, but I guess he did so with enough consistency that he was fully released in 2009. But then in 2012 he was right back in after committing arson. Fast forward to 2014 where he received day parole again, until one day in 2015 he left prison and never returned. I mean, honestly, with his violent history and blatant attempts to escape prison, I can't believe they even gave him parole again. To this day, no one knows his whereabouts. Next up at number 9, Nikolai Dumagliev. Again, sorry, I'm sure I'm saying these names terribly. Some call him Metal Fang. Nikolai is a convicted killer responsible for the death of at least 10 people between 1979 to 1991. Although he had already taken about 6 lives, he wasn't arrested until 1979 after killing a fellow fireman in a drunken stupor. Upon admitting him, he was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and less than a year later, he was released. He wasted wasted no time adding another 3 victims to his hit list, but it was his 9th killing that led to his final capture. He had invited some friends over to his home, but for whatever reason, he decided that this was the perfect time to kill one of them and begin dismembering the body in another room while his guests were still in the house. The others went looking for him as he'd been gone a while and caught him in the horrendous act. Upon witnessing it, they fled the house and immediately reported it to the police, who then rushed over to his house to find him eating the body on his hands and knees and covered in blood. In such a state of shock, Nikolai actually managed to evade them and fled to the mountains fully nude and with only a hatchet in his hands. Eventually he was tracked down and arrested, and with his existing diagnosis was deemed unfit for trial and sent to an institution. He later escaped but was soon found, and although he isn't released yet, the question for his discharge is still very much on the table according to his doctors, which is wild. So let's just hope they don't go through with that. Coming in at number 8, Matthias Flink. Once a 2nd lieutenant in the Swedish army, during his time serving, he was known to have some really serious mental health problems that eventually led to a total mental breakdown and the death of 7 people. The day was June 11th, 1994, and after drowning his problems in alcohol, Flink went home to change his clothes. Once he was at home, he changed into his field uniform and grabbed a rifle as well as 150 rounds of ammunition. From there, he took a walk down to a nearby park where he shot 6 women and 2 men at random. He fled the scene, hiding out in a crane for a few hours until he finally decided to walk back home along the railroad, and it's there that he was caught by police. All but one of his victims lost their lives, and despite a bit of back and forth trying to determine if he should go to prison or an institution, ultimately the court charged him for the crimes and sentenced him to life. In 2008, Flink requested his sentence be changed from life to 25 years, and it was originally denied, but then in 2010 his request was accepted with the amendment of making it a 32-year sentence. But I guess due to good behavior, in 2014 he was officially released after only serving 20 years, and he remains walking free to this day. Coming in at number 7, Louis Van Scoor. Notoriously recognized as the apartheid killer, Louis was an active killer in South Africa between 1986 to 1989. And believe it or not, this is how he would target most of his victims. It's believed Louis would often take the lives of those who were in the process of surrendering to him, and almost always his victims were people of color. Allegedly, Louis would even sometimes snatch passersby off the street. Perhaps they had been a witness to his crimes, or maybe he just felt like it. At the time, the South African laws were a little bit loose surrounding his killings, and combined with the institutional racism from apartheid, Louis again and again and again walked free from his homicides. The true number of his victims is not known, but once in an interview he didn't deny killing over 100 people. While not necessarily confession, most people would deny something that they didn't do. Eventually he was convicted for taking the lives of 9 people and sentenced to 20 years, but for whatever reason, as it turns out, he only served 12 and was released in 2004. Coming in at number 6, Arfin Nesset. On the outside, he looked like an unsuspecting nursing home manager, but in reality, he's believed to have killed even more than some of the most prolific criminals out there. In 1977, after police interrogation, it was discovered Nesset had purchased an unusually large amount of Curacet, a poisonous muscle relaxant. Nesset claims he originally bought it to kill his dog, but confessed to killing 25 of his patients with the drug as well. Now, this was just what he confessed. The number is believed to be as high as 138. Although at the start of the trial he pled guilty, later Nesset came forward saying that was actually a false confession made under duress and that he was actually innocent. Still, he was found guilty for the death of 22 patients under his care and sentenced to 21 years in prison, which at the time was the max sentence you could receive in Norway. However, just 12 years later, in 2004, Nesset was released for good behavior and is currently living out his life under a new name in an undisclosed location. Coming in at number 5, Mitchell Johnson and Andrew Golden. The year was 1998, and teen pals Mitchell and Andrew decided to steal the car of Mitchell's parents. And oh boy, do I wish that is where this story stopped. The next step in their plan was to head over to Mitchell's grandparents' house to steal a bevy of unlocked firearms that were stowed there, and then finally drive them to their school. Once they got there, they rang a fire alarm to force the populace outside and hid in the bushes so that no one could see them. Once everyone was outside, the killing began. They shot at their peers, killing 4 of them along with one of the staff members that had been trying to protect the younger victims, and another 10 were seriously injured. Both boys were arrested for the crimes and immediately confessed, but due to their ages were tried as minors and given short sentences. As a result, Johnson was released in 2005 at the age of 21, and Golden followed 2 years later on his 21st birthday as well. As of 2016, they are the only living school attackers who walk free. Coming in at number 4, Karla Homolka. Responsible for the death of at least 3 women with the help of her husband Paul Bernardo in the early 90s, it is wild that Karla is released. For starters, one of the 3 lives she took was her own sister. Allegedly, Karla gave her to her husband as a sadistic gift before drugging her with animal tranquilizers that forced her to choke on her own vomit. A few years later, in 1993, Bernardo was arrested for their crimes, and Homolka was quick to throw him under the bus, saying that she was an unwilling accomplice under his fist and acted out of fear that she could be killed if she didn't comply. So with that, Karla took a plea deal and was only sentenced to 12 years versus her husband's life sentence. But the craziest part is that authorities actually received video footage that proved she was way more than a victim of the whole situation. She was actually a perpetrator of many of the crimes herself. But with her plea deal already settled, they never changed her sentence. Fast forward to 2005, and Karla was released from prison before relocating to Quebec, where she remarried and had 2 kids. The town she currently resides in is reportedly not happy to have her there, and there are frequent issues from other parents when she tries to volunteer or involve herself in any way with the community. Next up at number 3, David McGreevy. Dubbed the Monster of Worcester, David McGreevy was an ex-Navy man who, after his dismissal in 1971, went back to live with his parents in Worcestershire. His time with his parents was a bit rough. Allegedly, he was fired from a lot of jobs, his fiancée left him, and he more or less drowned his feelings in alcohol. Eventually, his parents got fed up with him and his drinking, so they kicked him out. From there, he moved in with some friends, Clive and Elsie Ralph, and their family. According to Elsie, David was actually a really nice man most of the time and was great with her daughters and son, and was known to frequently take care of them when she and Clive were out. But one night, after coming home drunk, he committed some of the most gruesome acts I have ever read about. When he was in trial for the brutal crimes, he immediately pleaded guilty, and the hearing lasted only 8 minutes, as there was no defense plea, no motive, and no case of diminished responsibility. David was ultimately sentenced for life with a minimum of 20 years. Then in 2018, after 45 years behind bars, he was released, much to the anger of Elsie and Clive, who felt they had been promised he would remain in prison for life. But according to his parole hearing, he has changed incredibly over the near half a century and no longer seemed like a threat to society. Coming in at number 2, Wolfgang Abel and Marco Furlan. These 2 met in their teens and both bonded over their extremist and supremacist views immediately. In 1977, they decided to enact a plan to, as they put it, clean up the streets of Europe. This cleansing involved targeting people who were gay, individuals with substance abuse issues, and escorts, among nearly every minority group as well. After After each kill, they would leave behind leaflets with the bodies covered in a certain evil German war symbol, proclaiming their motives and beliefs behind why they were targeting these victims. It is believed that the duo are responsible for taking between 10 to 28 lives during their 7-year killing spree. Upon their arrest, they denied any involvement in the atrocities, instead saying they were a scapegoat for the police who hadn't been able to find the real assailants. Both were sentenced to 30 years for their horrendous acts, and not long after, copycats began popping up all over Italy and Germany from others who shared their racist ideologies. Flash forward to 2009, and Abel was admitted to house arrest, where he stayed until his official release in 2016. Furlan was released back in 2010, and according to recent reports, neither are in contact with each other and are no longer friends. So let's just hope that means their plan to cleanse the city is through. And last up, in our number 1 spot, Caroline Wood. In 1986, a woman named Gwendolyn Graham moved to Grand Rapids and shortly after started work at a nursing home. It was at this job she met the infamous Caroline Wood, and her life would be forever changed. The pair quickly became lovers after they met, and allegedly after a year together started to kill. All of their victims were late-stage Alzheimer's patients at the nursing home, all of whom were far too weak to fight off their attacks. As the story goes, Caroline Wood was riddled with guilt for what she and Gwendolyn did and confessed the atrocities to her ex-husband. He promptly told the police what she had done, and with this information, they ordered new autopsies to be done on the victims, and the women were both charged for the 5 killings. But here is where it gets twisty. Gwendolyn came forward saying that she had never actually been in the room during the attacks, and that she acted as someone on the watch. But when the pair was on trial, Caroline Wood had the same story, and it seems as though the jury took Caroline's side. Gwendolyn was convicted for first degree and got 5 life sentences with no chance of parole, whereas Caroline pleaded guilty to second degree and got off with a sentence of 20 to 40 years. But allegedly, Caroline told another woman it had been her all along, and that she set up Gwendolyn as a means of payback for leaving her. After 8 dismissals for parole, eventually she was granted leave in 2018, but Gwendolyn will remain for the rest of her days.